I remember the exact moment everything shifted inside me. It wasn't during a board meeting or a keynote speech or one of those high-pressure moments when the world watches every move I make. No, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Seattle, outside a youth shelter I visited only because my PR team insisted it would humanize my image. I hate admitting that now, but that's the truth. I went there planning to smile, shake hands, sign a check, and leave before the cameras captured my impatience. I wasn't prepared for anything real, certainly not for a question that would split open parts of myself I thought I'd sealed shut forever. The air was cold enough to sting my face, and the smell of wet concrete mixed with the faint aroma of soup drifting from inside the shelter. My security team kept forming that protective circle around me, the one that makes me feel like I'm walking through life inside a bubble. I shook hands with the staff, listened to their rehearsed gratitude, nodded at the rows of teenagers eating quietly at long metal tables. Some looked at me with curiosity. Others didn't look at all. I told myself it didn't bother me, that I was doing something good by just being there. I even believed it, for a moment. Then as I stepped outside, everything froze. A boy, thin, maybe 13 or 14, though it was hard to tell under the dirt smudged on his face, stood directly in front of me. His clothes were a mix of oversized items clearly donated from different places. A dingy gray hoodie, jeans with shredded knees, shoes too big for his feet. But what caught me weren't his clothes. It was his eyes. They were old eyes. The kind you only see on people who have lived too many lifetimes before they're even old enough to understand childhood. Security moved instantly. "Sir, step back." They reached for him, but he didn't move. He held his ground with a kind of quiet bravery I rarely see in adults. His voice, when it came out, wasn't demanding or loud. It was soft, steady, almost resolute. "Why can you send rockets to space?" he asked, staring straight at me. "But I still don't have a bed tonight?" Everything inside me went silent. For a second, it felt like the city around us vanished. No car noise, no chatter, no clicking cameras. Just me and this boy, his question hanging between us like a doorway I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through. I opened my mouth to give the kind of answer I'd trained myself to give over the years. Something polished, something distant enough to be safe, but warm enough to seem human. But nothing came out. Absolutely nothing. The words evaporated before they reached my tongue. It was such a simple question, and it was the most devastating thing anyone had asked me in years. Before I could respond, my head of security stepped forward. "We need to move, sir." The boy looked down as if he expected that response, as if he'd seen this moment before with other people who walked past him every day, people with warm coats and bank accounts and full calendars. But then he looked up at me again, and this time something in me cracked, quietly, but unmistakably. "I'm not asking for money," he said. "I just want to know why it works like that." Security gently pushed him aside. Cameras clicked. My team tried to usher me toward the car. But my feet didn't move. My chest tightened with something I didn't recognize at first. Shame, guilt, or maybe the sudden realization that despite everything I'd built, I'd stopped seeing people as people. My mind threw up the shields it always uses. I donate. I support programs. I create jobs. I'm not responsible for every kid on the street. I can't fix everything. I'm doing what I can. But then I looked back at him, really looked at him, and all those shields felt paper thin. He wasn't angry. He wasn't blaming me. He wasn't begging. He was just asking the one question I'd spent years avoiding, the one I buried under spreadsheets and strategy meetings and expansion plans. Why can someone like me build empires while kids like him sleep on sidewalks? My throat tightened as the car door opened behind me. I forced myself to step inside. The door closed, shutting out the cold air, shutting out the boy, but the weight of his question pressed against me so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. As the car pulled away, I watched him shrink into the distance through the tinted window. He didn't look back. He just turned and walked toward the alley beside the shelter, hands stuffed in his sleeves to stay warm. I stared until I couldn't see him anymore. Then I sat back in my seat, every muscle in my body tense. My team chatted about the next event, about how the photos came out, about how empathetic I looked in them. But I didn't hear a word. All I could hear was that boy's voice repeating the question over and over in my head. Why can you send rockets to space, but I still don't have a bed tonight? I looked down at my hands, hands that had built companies, launched innovations, changed industries, and for the first time in a long time, they looked unfamiliar to me, like they belonged to a stranger. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, those 10 seconds with a homeless boy who refused to be invisible, were the beginning of something that would unravel everything I thought I understood about myself, my success, and the world I'd created around me. I had no idea just how deep the question would cut, or how much it would change the man I believed I was. On the ride back to the office, I tried to force my mind onto something else. Numbers, projections, a problem with a logistics center we'd been debating for weeks. But the boy's eyes kept pushing their way into every thought. I stared at the tablet in my hand, scrolling through emails without really reading them. Every neatly typed message, every graph, every forecast suddenly looked flat. I've been poor before. People like to forget that part, or assume it was just a brief character-building inconvenience before I stepped into some predestined spotlight. But I remember the feeling of watching my mother at the kitchen table with bills spread out like landmines. I remember waiting for her to say something, anything, and instead hearing only the sound of her quietly doing math, trying to stretch numbers that refused to stretch. Back then, I used to tell myself that if I ever made it, really made it, I'd never forget what it felt like to be on the other side. I would remember how every small kindness mattered, and how every closed door cut a little deeper. Somewhere along the way, that promise turned into something else, into a belief that the best way to help the world was to build bigger, move faster, scale everything. But sitting there in the car, watching buildings blur past the window, I realized I had started thinking of people like the world instead of individuals. It's easier to manage a problem when it becomes abstract. It doesn't hurt as much. "Sir, we're 10 minutes out," my assistant said from the front seat, breaking my trance. "Okay," I replied automatically. He turned slightly in his seat. "The shelter visit looked great, by the way. Cameras got some good shots of you kneeling by the tables. Social team is already talking about a day of hope angle. Could play really well." I nodded, but my chest tightened. Kneeling. That detail seemed to matter more to them than the faces I'd seen while I was down there. "Did anyone get the boy?" I asked suddenly. "The boy?" he repeated. "The kid outside when we left," I said. "The one who spoke to me. Was he in any of the photos?" My assistant glanced at the head of PR, who frowned slightly. "I don't think so," she said. "Security moved him pretty fast. We don't want that kind of moment to look confrontational on camera. Not great optics. Not great optics." The phrase stung more than it should have. I looked back down at the tablet and locked the screen. The cabin fell into a polite hush. No one asked what the boy had said. No one asked if it bothered me. Maybe they assumed it didn't. Maybe they assumed I had developed some inhuman immunity to moments like that. Maybe I'd encouraged that assumption. By the time we reached the office, I had put on my mask again. The lobby was as polished and controlled as always. Glass surfaces, warm lighting, colorful branding displays, everything designed to feel both futuristic and friendly. People greeted me with the same mixture of respect and nervousness I had gotten used to. I walked through it all like an actor stepping back on stage. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. The suit, the posture, the practiced neutral expression. It all looked like an answer to a question no one was asking out loud. What does success look like? But if you had told that boy outside the shelter that this was what success looked like, I doubted he would have cared. To him, success was probably just a locked door that never opened. On the top floor, the familiar world of controlled chaos wrapped itself around me again. Assistants moving quickly, voices discussing revenue, new ventures, partnerships. People came up to me with quick updates and urgent questions. Jeff, we need your input on the expansion timeline. Jeff, there's a concern about the warehouse automation rollout. Jeff, the media team wants approval on the interview talking points. I answered on autopilot. My brain knew how to handle these problems. It had built entire frameworks around solving them. But somewhere behind all that, the other question sat in the dark, refusing to go away. Why can you send rockets to space, but I still don't have a bed tonight? During a strategy meeting about our next big push, one of the senior executives was presenting a PowerPoint slide about efficiency gains in the delivery network. He sounded excited. If we implement this model at scale, he said, pointing at a graph sloping upward, we can cut costs per package by another 4%. That's billions in value over the next 10 years. Heads nodded around the table. People scribbled notes. I stared at the graph and saw something else. Not parcels, not units, but people. Workers trying to make rent. Families tracking a package that contained something small but meaningful. A kid sitting on a curb with no address to receive anything at all. Jeff, the executive said, what do you think? I realized I'd been silent for an uncomfortable amount of time. It's good, I replied finally. Let's explore it further. But make sure we're not just extracting more while giving less. Efficiency can't be the only thing we measure. There was a brief, awkward pause. Efficiency was our religion. They didn't know what to do when I questioned it, even gently. We'll incorporate some quality of life metrics into the assessment, he offered. Do that, I said, though I knew we'd probably end up back at the same trade-offs we always did. The numbers always found a way to justify themselves. The meeting ended. People shuffled out. I stayed behind, staring at the empty chairs. The boy had probably never seen a boardroom like this. He had probably never seen a graph measuring billions of dollars in movement. But somehow, one sentence from him weighed more on me than every quarterly report I'd reviewed in years. Later that night, at home, the silence was louder than usual. My house was the kind of place most people see only in magazines. Expansive, perfectly furnished, clean in ways that didn't feel entirely human. I walked through it like a guest. The walls held art that had been chosen by designers. The kitchen was stocked by staff. The temperature adjusted automatically based on my preferences, which I realized I couldn't even clearly remember setting. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the distance. Somewhere down there, that boy was trying to find a safe place to sleep. I could buy buildings. I could spin up initiatives. I could donate amounts that most people would never even see on paper. And yet there he was, surviving night to night. The gap between what I could do and what I actually did suddenly felt like a chasm I hadn't dared to measure. I remembered my mother again, her voice steady even when her eyes looked tired. We keep going, she would say. We do what we can with what we have. Back then, what we have was very little. But she still found ways to help people who had even less. A neighbor, a friend, someone who needed a ride or a meal. What excuse did I have now? I walked into my office and sat down heavily. On the wall was a framed photo from one of the space launches, the rocket cutting through the sky, a testament to human ambition and engineering. I had always loved that image. It symbolized possibility, courage, the pursuit of something bigger than ourselves. Tonight, it symbolized something else, how easy it is to chase the extraordinary while ignoring the ordinary suffering right in front of us. I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank note. Then I typed a single sentence. Why can you send rockets to space, but I still don't have a bed tonight? I stared at the words. They looked wrong in plain text, too small for how loud they sounded in my head. But writing them down made them harder to escape. I started listing reasons almost like I was building a case for my defense. I created thousands of jobs. I pushed technology forward. I support nonprofits and shelters. I can't fix everything. They're not my responsibility alone. After each line, I felt a little sicker. None of those statements were outright lies, but together they felt like one long excuse, a story I'd been telling myself to stay comfortable. I deleted the list. The cursor blinked on the empty screen. Slowly, almost against my own ego, I typed something else. I stopped looking closely because it hurt too much. There it was, an admission I'd never spoken out loud, not even to myself. When you reach a certain level of power, the world rearranges itself around you. People stop telling you uncomfortable truths. They stop asking hard questions. Doors that used to be closed just swing open. The friction that once forced you to examine your choices disappears, and it becomes very easy to drift into a life where everything is optimized for your convenience. I had let that happen. I'd allowed layers of insulation, wealth, status, staff, security, to shield me from the raw and messy reality of lives unlike mine. I'd convinced myself that focusing on systems and scale was the nobler choice, the more rational way to help. But that boy wasn't a system. He wasn't a metric. He was a human being standing in front of me asking for something simple, for me to see him. And I had failed in the moment. That realization settled in my chest like a stone. The next day I tried to dismiss it, to bury it under another packed schedule. But reality has a way of reflecting itself back to you when you least expect it. A conversation in the hallway about low-value regions made me think of neighborhoods where kids like him sleep on floors. A report about customer satisfaction made me think of satisfaction as a luxury some people never get to chase. A casual joke about first-world problems felt suddenly cruel. In one meeting, a younger employee was presenting a small internal project aimed at helping hourly workers access emergency funds for unexpected expenses. It was a tiny initiative, almost insignificant next to everything else we were doing. But as she spoke, there was a conviction in her voice that caught my attention. Sometimes a small amount at the right time, she said, is the difference between someone keeping their housing or ending up on the street. It's not everything, but it matters. I watched the faces around the table. Most people were politely engaged, but I could tell some of them saw this as a feel-good side quest, not a serious priority. "Keep going," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She blinked, then continued. She talked about patterns she had noticed in data, about how many people were just one crisis away from losing stability. The room felt different for a moment, less like a machine and more like a collection of actual human beings being asked to care. When she finished, I looked at her and asked, "How far could this scale if we took it seriously?" Her eyes widened. "Honestly, very far, but it would require support from the top." She meant me. I nodded. "Let's explore it, and not as PR, as infrastructure." As the meeting moved on, I realized something simple but unsettling. I had the power to change how priorities were set. And if I wasn't using that power in a way that acknowledged kids like that boy, then I was part of the reason his question existed in the first place. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I knew I couldn't keep my distance anymore. I couldn't just write a bigger check and pat myself on the back. Money helps, but it's easy. It doesn't cost you the parts of yourself you're most afraid to confront. If I really believed in building a better future, it couldn't just be about faster deliveries, higher margins, grander rockets. It had to include the most basic thing, making sure fewer kids went to sleep without knowing where home would be. The next morning, before anyone had a chance to fill my calendar, I made a decision. I was going back to the shelter, not with cameras, not with a press release. Just me. And this time, I wasn't going to walk past the question. I was going to find the boy who asked it. I arrived at the shelter just after sunrise, when the streets still felt half asleep, and the air carried that cold, metallic smell that only exists in early morning Seattle. This time, there were no photographers, no PR team, no prepared statements. I wore a simple jacket and jeans, clothes I hadn't worn in years because they made me feel too ordinary. Vulnerability hides easier behind tailored suits. A volunteer opening the side door looked startled when he recognized me. His eyes widened like he was trying to decide whether this was a hallucination or a security threat. Mr. Bezos? Are you alone? Yes, I said. He looked around me, probably expecting an entourage to appear from the fog. How can I help you? I'm looking for a boy, I said. Thin, maybe 14. He was outside yesterday when I left. He hesitated, rubbing his hands against his sweater sleeves. Kids come and go, many don't stay. Nights are rough around here. I know, I said quietly. He gestured for me to follow him around the back. Trash bins, graffiti, a chain-link fence that looked like it hadn't been replaced in decades. This was the Seattle most people didn't show in travel brochures. He sleeps around here sometimes, the volunteer said, but lots of kids move before sunrise. Cops sweep the area some nights. Sometimes other homeless adults scare them off. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Somehow the idea of a child being chased from place to place, like a stray animal, felt almost unbearable. Maybe we can check the underpass, he added. He's been seen there before. We walked several blocks. My shoes soaked up the dampness of the pavement. People experiencing homelessness were already stirring, packing sleeping bags, pushing carts, staring at us with suspicion or indifference. I felt their eyes on me. Most didn't recognize me. To them, I was just another stranger who didn't belong there. When we reached the underpass, the volunteer walked ahead, scanning the shadows. There, he whispered, pointing to a spot beneath the concrete slab. A small figure huddled near a shopping cart filled with blankets, bottles, and a few plastic bags. It was him. The boy saw us approaching and tensed immediately, like a wild animal bracing to run. His hands curled into fists inside the sleeves of his hoodie. It's okay, the volunteer said gently. He's just here to talk. But the boy's eyes locked onto mine, wide, wary, defensive. Yesterday he had confronted me fearlessly. Today he looked like he wasn't sure if I was here to help or to take something away from him. I raised my hand slowly. I came back to see you, I said. He didn't answer. His body stayed rigid. Not knowing what else to do, I sat down on the cold ground a few feet away from him. The concrete sent a chill straight through my bones. For a moment, the boy looked shocked that I would sit there with him at all. I'm sorry about yesterday, I said. I should have talked to you instead of letting them push you aside. He pulled the hood tighter around his face. Doesn't matter, he muttered. People always walk around me. I'm used to it. Those words hurt more than they should have, the casual acceptance of invisibility. What's your name? I asked. He hesitated, then said, Tyler. Tyler, I repeated softly. I'm Jeff. I know who you are, he said, his eyes narrowing. Everybody knows. Maybe they know about the things I've done, I said. But they don't really know me. He shrugged like he didn't care. Silence settled between us. Cars passed overhead, the rumbling echoing through the concrete. The smell of damp cardboard and gasoline lingered in the air. I could tell Tyler was watching me, analyzing me, trying to figure out my angle. You asked me something yesterday, I finally said. Something important. You didn't answer, he replied, not looking at me. I didn't know how, I admitted. That made him look up. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not trust yet, but curiosity. Maybe disbelief. Grown-ups always have answers, he said. Especially rich ones. I took a breath. Maybe that's the problem. He frowned but didn't speak. I continued. You asked me why I can send rockets to space while you don't have a bed at night. He nodded slightly. I've been thinking about that question since you asked it, I said. And I realized something. It wasn't really a question about rockets, was it? He hugged his knees to his chest. It was a question about why nobody cares. My throat tightened. You're wrong, I said gently. People do care. They just don't know how to show it. Then why don't things change, he shot back. If people like you cared, wouldn't things be different for kids like me? I mean, you can do anything you want. The raw honesty in his voice shook me more than any criticism I'd ever received in my life. I can't do everything, I whispered, but I should do more. And I'm sorry that I haven't. Tyler looked away again, his shoulders trembling slightly. I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from something else. Where's your family? I asked gently. He hesitated a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, fragile. My mom disappeared 6 months ago, he said. She was using again. One day she said she had to go fix something and never came back. My stomach sank. And your dad? Never met him. I pressed my palms against the concrete, grounding myself so I wouldn't crumble in front of him. Have you tried staying inside the shelter? I asked carefully. He shook his head quickly. Too many older guys. Some are scary. I don't like sleeping around strangers. I don't want my stuff stolen. And sometimes they yell at us or make us leave if we don't follow rules we don't even understand. His voice cracked. It's safer out here. Safer. Out here. Under a bridge, in the cold. Everything inside me rebelled against that idea. A kid should never have to think that way. But he wasn't wrong. For him, this chaos was predictable. Shelters weren't. How old are you, Tyler? I asked. 14, he whispered. 14. I felt something inside me break, not loudly, but deeply, like a quiet internal snap. I want to help you, I said, not in a big corporate way, just in a human way. He didn't answer, but he didn't get up and run either. We sat in silence again, a long, heavy silence that wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of silence that happens when two people stand at the edge of something important but don't know how to step forward. Then Tyler lifted his head slightly and asked in a voice so soft I almost missed it. If you had met someone like you when you were my age, would your life be different? My breath caught in my throat. His eyes met mine, a direct, piercing gaze that cut right through every layer of ego, power, and distance I'd built over decades. I felt myself unravel. I don't know, I whispered, but I wish someone had seen me the way I see you right now. For the first time, Tyler looked unsure of what to do with my honesty. You're not like the other rich people, he said cautiously. I am, I admitted. Or maybe I was. His brow furrowed. Why are you really here? And that was the moment I knew the truth, not the answer I would have given to a journalist or a board or a friend. I'm here, I said, my voice trembling, because you made me look at myself. And I didn't like what I saw. Tyler blinked slowly, his expression shifting, not fully trusting, not fully softening. But something changed. It was small, but it was real. I didn't know then that those words would be the beginning of the most painful, eye-opening conversation of my life. I just knew I was finally ready to hear everything he had to say, and to face everything I'd been avoiding about myself. Tyler didn't speak right away. He just studied me with this strange mix of suspicion and something softer, something like hope, but far too fragile to name out loud. A cold breeze pushed through the underpass, lifting the edges of his oversized hoodie. He hugged himself tighter. I wanted to reach out to drape my jacket around him to fix everything in one sweeping gesture. But instinct told me not to move too fast. Not to make this moment about rescuing him or about my guilt or about easing my own conscience. He didn't need a hero. He needed a human being who wouldn't flinch at his truth. Can I tell you something? He finally asked, voice small. Anything, I said. I didn't ask you that question yesterday to make you feel bad, he said quietly. I asked because I don't understand how the world works. I don't get why some people have everything and some people have nothing. I'm not angry. I'm just confused. I felt my eyes sting. I couldn't remember the last time a child had spoken to me without wanting something. An autograph, a photo, a moment. Tyler wasn't asking for anything except honesty. I'm confused too, I admitted. He looked surprised. You? But you're like, at the top. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Being at the top doesn't mean you understand everything. It just means fewer people tell you the truth. Tyler absorbed that for a long moment. I guess I just wanted to know. He hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. If someone like you even sees someone like me. Everything inside me cracked open. I see you, I said, my voice breaking. I see you, Tyler. His chin trembled. He looked away quickly, pretending he had dirt in his eye. I'm tired, he whispered. I'm tired of pretending it's normal to sleep under bridges. I'm tired of acting tough. I'm tired of not knowing what comes next. I'm just tired. Those words were too heavy for a 14-year-old to carry. They shouldn't have belonged to a child. Without thinking, I leaned closer. You shouldn't have to carry that alone. He swallowed hard. I don't want to go to a shelter. They freak me out. I understand, and I'm not asking you to go anywhere you don't feel safe. I paused. But what if we found a place together? Somewhere small, quiet, with people who actually care? No cameras, no speeches, just safety. Tyler's eyes flicked up to meet mine, searching for the catch. Why would you do that? He asked softly. The real answer was sitting painfully in my chest. Because yesterday you asked me a question I couldn't answer, I said. And today, you asked me another one. And the truth is, I don't want to be the kind of man who ignores either. His jaw tightened, like he was trying not to cry. The instinct to be tough, to be invisible, was fighting against a child's need to be seen. What if it doesn't work? He said. What if they're mean? What if I get kicked out? What if... You won't be alone this time, I said. I'll stay involved. I'm not promising perfection. I'm promising effort. He stared at me a long time, long enough that the air between us thickened with things neither of us knew how to say. Then he nodded. Barely, but enough. The volunteer who had brought me here stepped forward quietly. There's a transitional program 2 blocks from here, he said. It's small, staff is good, they don't push kids around, he'd be safe. I looked at Tyler. Would you let me walk you there? He hesitated, but then, slowly, he gathered his things. A small backpack, a blanket, 2 plastic bags. He moved like he expected each second to be the one where I changed my mind. But I didn't. We walked in silence. The city was waking up, buses rumbling, people rushing to work, the smell of coffee and exhaust mixing in the cold air. To everyone else, it was a normal morning. To me, it felt like the world had cracked open and I was finally seeing what had been there all along. At the door of the transitional center, Tyler froze. I don't want to go alone, he said under his breath. You won't, I told him. We went in together. A woman at the front desk greeted us warmly, not even recognizing me, which felt strangely refreshing. She spoke to Tyler directly, gently, respectfully. She explained the rules, the rooms, the staff. She didn't talk down to him. She didn't rush him. And for the first time since I met him, I saw Tyler's shoulders relax. He wasn't safe yet, not fully, but he wasn't alone. And that mattered. After paperwork, after introductions, after a small tour, the staff offered Tyler a warm meal. He hesitated, then finally sat down and ate. Watching him take those first cautious bites felt like witnessing a fragile flower push its way through concrete. When he finished, he came back to me. His eyes were clearer, softer, no longer the guarded stare of someone waiting to be hurt. Will you come back? He asked. If you want me to, I said. He nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. I felt something shift deep inside me, something slow and steady and real. Before leaving, I gave the staff my private number and told them to call me directly for anything Tyler needed. They promised they would. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, but it didn't sting anymore. It felt cleansing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about rockets or quarterly earnings or efficiency metrics. I wasn't thinking about legacy or headlines or strategies. I was thinking about one boy, one question, one truth I'd spent years avoiding. On the walk back, the world around me felt different. People passed by, rushed, distracted, wrapped in their own lives. I used to move through crowds like that too, untouched by the things right in front of me. But after Tyler, I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. Back home, I sat in my office again and looked at the framed photo of the rocket cutting through the sky. But instead of pride, I felt something else: perspective. We chase extraordinary things because they're impressive, but sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is pay attention to the ordinary suffering you've learned to ignore. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The principle I'd been taught since childhood, that what you give to the world returns to you in ways you don't expect, suddenly made sense in a way that had nothing to do with wealth or success. Tyler didn't give me a problem to solve. He gave me a mirror, one I had been avoiding for far too long. In the days that followed, I didn't just help Tyler. I funded the small transitional program he joined, expanded it, hired more trained staff, created a pilot network for youth shelters built on dignity instead of punishment. I didn't announce it with fanfare. I didn't attach my name. I just built the thing the same way I built everything else, brick by brick, decision by decision. Except this time I built it with a different part of myself, a human part. And I kept visiting Tyler. Sometimes he talked, sometimes he didn't. But each time he stood a little taller. He trusted a little more. He understood that someone cared. And every time I saw him, I felt something inside me settle, like a compass finally finding its true north. One afternoon, months later, Tyler and I were walking near the center when he asked, "Do you think the world will ever change?" I looked down at him and said, "It already is." He smiled, a real smile, small but bright, and for the first time since I met him, he looked like a kid, not a survivor. Sometimes it only takes one question to wake up someone who forgot how to look. And sometimes the most powerful things in the world aren't rockets or companies or billions of dollars. Sometimes it's a child asking, "Do you see me?" If you felt something in this story, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and share your thoughts. You never know whose life you might touch by speaking up. And more importantly, what question would you ask someone with power?